Good afternoon and welcome to Double Take, Edson's Flag Honoring Native Veterans. Please use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We will share key information with you throughout the program via the chat box. We also ask that you not close your browser window immediately after the program, as a survey will appear for you to provide valuable feedback. This program is being recorded and will be available on our website. It is also being live captioned, which you can access with the CC button at the bottom of your screen. My name is Kelly Skeen, and I am an interpretation specialist at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. This afternoon, we gratefully acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here, the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we are gathered, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing the historic building that houses the American Art Museum today. It is a pleasure to be with you and present this online version of our popular in-gallery program, Double Take. This series brings together curators from the American Art Museum into conversations with scholars across the Smithsonian to reveal the unexpected connections between American art and nearly every other subject we cover here at the Smithsonian, from history to anthropology, astronomy to zoology. Today, we'll explore the link between art, military service, and Native history and culture. To illuminate this link, I'm joined by three Smithsonian experts. Nora Atkinson is the Fleur and Charles Bressler Curator in Charge of the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and was named Washingtonian Magazine's 2018 Best Boundary Pushing Curator for her work on exhibitions such as No Spectators, The Art of Burning Man, 2018, and Murder is Her Hobby, Frances Glessner Lee and the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death, 2017. Atkinson joined the Renwick in 2014 and was part of the team responsible for the gallery's major two-year renovation and reinvention. Before joining the Smithsonian, Atkinson was curator at the Bellevue Art Museum. Nora is joined by her colleagues from the National Museum of the American Indian, Alexandra Harris, and Rebecca Troutman. Alexandra Harris is a senior editor and writer at the National Museum of the American Indian, where she has developed and edited scholarly books, exhibitions, strategic plans, and other communications since 2008. Her editorial projects have earned awards for excellence in research from the Secretary of the Smithsonian. Most recently, she co-authored and edited Why We Serve, Native Americans in the United States Armed Forces, 2020. Prior to 2008, she was a curator at the Barona Cultural Center and Museum in San Diego. She holds an MA in American Indian Studies from the University of California at Los Angeles. Rebecca Head Troutman is the project curator for the National Native American Veterans Memorial at the National Museum of the American Indian. Troutman curated the exhibitions Vantage Point, the Contemporary Art Collection 2010 to 2011, and Making Marks, Prints from Crow's Shadow Press 2013 to 14, and co-curated Stretching the Canvas, 8 Decades of Native Painting, 2019 to 2022, currently on view at NMAI in New York. In 2012, she organized the first US performance by Canadian artist Kent Monkman. Troutman's graduate work at the University of New Mexico focused on modern and contemporary Native American art. Nora, Alexandra, and Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited for this conversation. I'm going to have Nora take it from here and kick things off by telling us more about Marie Watt's Edson's Flag.
Thanks, Kelly. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Nora Atkinson. I am the curator in charge at the Renwick Gallery, and I am delighted today to open the discussion on a work from our collection that is currently one of the anchor pieces featured in our permanent collection galleries, Edson's Flag by artist Marie Watt. Could I have the next slide, please? Watt is an American artist and citizen of the Seneca Nation with German-Scot ancestry. Her interdisciplinary work draws from history, biography, Iroquois proto-feminism, and indigenous teachings. In it, she explores the intersection of history, community, and storytelling. Watt holds an MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University. She also has degrees from Willamette University and the Institute of American Indian Arts. Next slide. Edson's Flag is an early work from a series of 2- and 3-dimensional pieces Watt calls her blanket stories, and it features a flag with a personal family history. Watt's great uncle Edson, whom she recalls had a big toothy grin, was a World War II military veteran and a fixture in Watt's grandmother's home. When Edson passed away, he was buried with military honors, and afterwards, the flag that was draped on his casket was given to Watt's grandmother, who then passed it down to Watt's mother and then on to her. Next slide. Oh, pardon, go back. It's always been important to Watt's family to use things. So she had first thought to hang the flag, but as you can see, it's quite large. Although she was working on a series about blankets, and a casket flag is in essence just that, she was at first hesitant to use it in her work since she was not a veteran herself. But she came to see the flag as an opportunity to honor not just her uncle, but the stories of Native American veterans and other people of color who serve. Next slide, please. Obviously, the flag is a very charged symbol, both of nationhood and particularly in the case of a burial flag of loss. So it has been a subject broached often in art. If this work reminds you of another artwork you've seen before, like Jasper John's flag from 2054, that's intentional. Watt is trained as a painter, and her work is steeped in art historical references, often draw an allusion to the 20th century canon of artists like Johns, Mark Rothko, Morris Louis, and Constantine Brancusi. Next slide. Yet her work also calls upon longer, deeper traditions, from the making and gifting of quilts and blankets to the totem poles made by Northwest Indigenous peoples. Watts actually hails from the Northwest. And this, I think, is what sets her work apart. She's quick to point out that there is no word for art in most Native languages, since art and utility and life seamlessly intersect and blend. And that's very much akin to the way we often think of craft in our field. While it is no less art, it often carries an association with utility, and its labor and history and traditions embed the work with meaning. Next slide. Many contemporary artists working in fiber use the medium in a way to complicate their message. Works like Sonia Clark's Monumental, in which she reimagines the dish towel waved as the Confederate flag of truce at Appomattox Courthouse in the scale of the Star-Spangled Banner, to consider a world in which it and not the Confederate battle flag became a lasting symbol. Or Catherine Clark's foreclosure quilts, which employ the association of the quilt with safety and warmth to draw attention to the plight of those who were displaced in the housing crisis. In Edson's flag, the hard edges of the canvas are replaced by overlapping layers, the softness of the satin trim and the loose natural ripples of hanging. And quilting and blankets instantly call to mind a natural relationship to the body and the domestic, to home and warmth and family, and give the piece an intimacy and personal presence. Next slide. In this, Watt's work resonates with other pieces in the Renwick's collection, like David Chatt's Love Dad, seen here, in which the artist collected 30 years of letters from his father and locked them away in memorial in a beaded cage. Together, these works offer a meditation on our relationship with such personal heirloom objects and the responsibility of carrying them. In the intimate correspondence of Chat with his father, locked away from view, and the casket flag, the artists reveal tantalizing glimpses of these objects, but never give us a full picture, tapping into universal memories and experiences. They are a way to honor these stories while also letting them go. Much like Chat's letters, in creating the work, Watt was careful not to cut the flag, but instead to add to it. Next slide. Watt's work also currently hangs in a gallery opposite a wall of cups by artist Aaron Toole, handmade domestic objects the veteran gives away to encourage us to remember and talk about the realities of war. In these, Toole leaves his handprints intact, and each cup feels very personal, like a very personal encounter with the artist. Next slide. We're sometimes tempted to seek perfection in art and life. Watt's works, like Edson's flag, are aesthetically pleasing and well-balanced. Her skill as a painter and colorist are evident, and the metaphor of the flag layered with cultural traditions offers rich ground to consider. But to me, it's also the idiosyncrasies she revels in, the sweetness of the satin, the undulation and marks of wear, belying a secret history of use and a life lived that make this work powerful. I see the mark on the army blanket, and it reminds me that this was a moment in someone's life recorded in cloth, like so many other moments. And it's a marker of our shared time and humanity. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Alexandra Harris, to give a little bit of historical context.
Thanks so much, Nora. I'm going to briefly orient you to the history of Native American participation in the US military. Native people have allied with colonists or allied with the colonists and participated in the US military since the Revolutionary War. So really some of the initial allies of the colonists were Native tribes and Native individuals. When we compiled the book, Why We Serve, we had a few goals to make our history slightly different. And one of those was to emphasize the diversity of tribes, of which there are hundreds, and all of them participated in service in different ways and approached their service in different ways based on their belief systems and individual motivations, but also diversity of experiences and personal reasons to join the military. Some Native people have served for the same reasons everyone else has throughout history. But there are also added layers that Native people have communicated to us in the present and in their words throughout history. And that's based on upholding sovereignty, often tribes aligned to try to uphold their own nationhood or sovereignty, and also to protect their homelands and way of life. Next slide, please. Prior to European contact, there were very diverse practices relating to warfare, and that differed again based on the tribal nation and their belief systems and their life ways. They had different definitions of warrior than we do today. So an expanded definition based on their languages might be more of a protector, so that someone who goes to war has an obligation when they return to continue to serve the community. It's hard to make blanket statements about Native peoples because their approaches are so diverse and their traditions are very, very diverse. But there are some commonalities that we've found in traditions, and a lot of that is a recognition that warfare and participating in war is a state of imbalance. So a lot of the customs and ceremonies surrounding preparing a warrior for his journey or her journey, it involve protection and while they're on that journey, and then reintegration into the community and a cleansing and healing along with that. And we see throughout history an adaptation of these traditions over time. Not all Native tribes had a warrior tradition. Some were very pacifist, and some would defend territory, but didn't have social structures surrounding warfare. So again, that diversity is something that we continue to emphasize. Next slide, please. I would argue that probably the most unique contribution made by Native people in the US military is their use of their languages in communication during World Wars I and II. You may have heard of the Navajo code talkers, but more than 24 tribal languages were used in communication, sometimes in a formal structure where they would create a code within the language, and sometimes in just happenstance between two people who spoke the same language. Either way, the enemy was never able to crack that language code. Next slide, please. Just to represent the diversity of these languages, we have some men from the Meskwaki tribe of Iowa, Hopi of Arizona, and Comanche, Oklahoma. These all were veterans, code talker veterans of World War II. Next slide, please. A few significant figures, Native figures who participated in World War II. On the left, we have Ira Hayes, who was made famous by the photograph by Joe Rosenthal of the flag raising on Iwo Jima. In the center is Major General Clarence Tinker, He was the first general to die in World War II in the Battle of Midway. We have Grace Thorpe, who served in Japan during World War II and who recently donated her archives to the National Museum of the American Indian. And on the right is Ernest Childers, who earned a Medal of Honor in Italy. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just as many people served on the home front as did in the military service during World War II. So this resulted in a massive social change for Native people. Many of these Native people who worked in war industries, by participating in this new wage work, it necessitated moving off the reservation, which wasn't as common prior to World War II. Another commonality between those who served in the military and those who served on the home front is that they started to gather a pan-Indian or cross-tribal identity, comparing notes with other Native people that they met. And that resulted post-war in a lot of call for social change. Organizations formed such as the National Congress of American Indians and other organizations for civil rights. Next, please. And since we're talking about the intersection between art and history, I wanted to present a few veterans who shared their art during and after the war. This is Gus Palmer on the left and photographer Horace Pula, who trained aerial photography during World War II in Tampa, Florida, and went on to document his community in Anadarko, Oklahoma for decades, documenting veterans of 3 wars. Next slide. Here you see code talker Carl Gorman. Post-war, he became a noted artist. Next. And on the left, we have Oscar Howe, a World War II veteran who served in European theater. And we have an upcoming exhibition and publication on his body of work that will be showing at our New York Museum in March. Not all artwork has been produced by World War II Native veterans. And one veteran I wanted to highlight as a final feature is Rick Bartow. He was a Vietnam veteran, and several Vietnam veterans especially used their artwork for healing and communicating that journey of healing. And so here we have his piece, PTSD 1, 2, and 3. And with that quick journey, I will hand you over to my colleague, Rebecca Troutman, to talk more about Marie Watt's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Marie Watt created Edson's flag for a 2004 exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian in New York, which also included this piece, now in the museum's collection. Works incorporating blankets, like these large wall pieces, as well as blanket stacks, prints, and photographs, were the focus of that exhibition and continue to be central to Watt's work. Watt is a member, as Nora noted, of the Seneca Nation, one of the 6 tribes that make up the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy. This piece, In the Garden, Corn, Beans, Squash, is named for the Haudenosaunee story of the food crops known as the 3 Sisters. The crops are planted together and provide strength and support to one another as they grow, as well as complementing one another nutritionally. In this piece, the intertwined strands climbing toward the sky also suggest the Haudenosaunee creation story of the fall to earth of Sky Woman, and the interlocking diamond forms recall the designs of Native American star quilts. Next slide, please. Blankets appeal to Watt as familiar objects that are present throughout our lives, associated with warmth, comfort, and protection. She appreciates the way that they carry people's memories and stories, particularly in their worn areas, tears, and stains, and the personalities that blankets develop over time as they become worn with use, faded in color, and stretched out of shape. Blankets play significant roles in many Native American cultures as gifts given to mark important events and rites of passage. Historically, blankets were key objects of trade between Native and non-Native people And so they carry a darker memory also of their role in spreading deadly smallpox among Native communities. Watt prefers to work with used or reclaimed blankets that she finds in thrift stores or that are donated by the public, along with the stories of what the blankets have meant in people's lives. She uses wool rather than synthetic blankets and describes them as the pelts of our animal relatives, the sheep. These large wall works are often made in community sewing circles with friends or open to the public, and the stitches are like signatures of the people who've contributed. The tactile qualities of the wool and the satin blanket bindings are intimately linked to the blanket's capacity for stirring memories in viewers and for conveying stories. Next slide, please. Looking at In the Garden and Edson's Flag side by side, we can see a number of parallels and relationships between them. Both reference star quilts, and I love the echo between the stitched star forms in Edson's flag and the flag and the stars of the American flag that peek out from behind the blankets. Both pieces have a design and a vertical axis linked to the story of Sky Woman's fall from the heavens to the earth, which is reinforced by the star imagery. The two pieces have a similar color palette, and they may even incorporate parts of some of the same blankets, given that they were made about the same time. In both works, we see the shimmer of satin bindings and the blanket's stretched areas, tears, and stains. Next slide, please. As Nora mentioned, Watt has also created towering stacks of folded blankets with an inherent tension between their almost architectural forms and the soft, pliable materials of which they're made. In addition to the references Nora mentioned, the blanket stacks also suggest skyscrapers and memorial columns, the tall conifer trees of the Pacific Northwest, where Watt grew up and continues to live today, and the modernist totems of the Anishinaabe artist George Morrison. They resemble piles of blankets to be given away at a potlatch or linens in an overstuffed closet, and they recall again the story of Sky Woman's fall to earth. Some of the blanket stacks incorporate steel I-beams in tribute to the Mohawk ironworkers who've contributed to building countless bridges and skyscrapers, particularly in New York City. Next slide, please. In 2008, wishing to personalize and humanize the stories of service members who lost their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan, Watt created a piece called Forget Me Not, Mothers and Sons. A circular steel framework supports a web made from blankets, from which hang about 250 hand-stitched memorial portraits. Next slide, please. These depict the mostly young service members and, drawing on the broad Haudenosaunee concept of motherhood, admired women, including mothers, grandmothers, aunties, and historical figures like Clara Barton, Nina Simone, and Julia Child. Each portrait is framed with colored satin binding, and an accompanying publication and website tell the stories of those pictured. Next slide, please. While the space created by the piece has been compared to a chapel and to works such as Richard Serra's Torqued Ellipse, Watt sees it as more akin to the storytelling circles that she experienced growing up in the Seattle urban Indian community. Forget Me Not creates a welcoming, inclusive space, a kind of sanctuary for contemplation and remembrance, and for the sharing of stories and memories. Next slide, please. I'll close with this photo of the National Native American Veterans Memorial, designed by Southern Cheyenne artist and Marine Corps Vietnam veteran Harvey Pratt, which opened on the grounds of the National Museum of the American Indian last November. It was important that the memorial's design be inclusive of and meaningful to all Native American veterans, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian, from all eras and branches of service. And I think it's interesting that Pratt also chose the welcoming and inclusive form of a circle for his design, a form that's significant in different ways in many Indigenous American cultural traditions, and that here again creates a space that invites gathering and remembrance. And now I'd like to welcome Nora and Alexandra back so that we can have a discussion.
I can start with a question.
Okay.
It can be for both of you, but it might be for Rebecca. But when I looked at Edson's flag, when you were talking about it, I also thought about landscape. And I was wondering if, and especially when you were comparing it to her other work, Rebecca, and I was wondering if there's any symbolism about landscape or home within that. And whether there's any connection with her blankets and Haudenosaunee treaties. So it's a stretch, but so as I understand, in some of the treaty agreements, the United States does still deliver bolts of cloth to the Haudenosaunee people. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I can start. I think it's interesting that in a number of Marie Watt's early blanket works, these wall works, and also in the columns, there's really a strong vertical axis as opposed to the horizontal axis that we typically see in American, Western landscape imagery. And so I don't know if there's so much a reference to kind of a broader landscape, but definitely to this kind of vertical axis of Haudenosaunee cosmology and the focus on the story of Sky Woman's fall to earth from the heavens. And she talked about with the columns too, with the blanket stacks, that they also reference the story. And the piece that both Nora and I showed includes Sky Women in the title. And so it also references the story and kind of the idea of a ladder for Sky Woman to use in going between the earth and the sky.
Something that I found kind of interesting about the piece, and I talked with Marie a little bit about her color choices with the pink blankets, which really just came out of necessity and what was available in many ways. But I still can't help but look at the piece and think of it as being a sort of feminizing of the American flag and the way that these, it's coming together and sort of obscuring, but also revealing it. And when Alex, you were talking a little bit about the effects of the war back home, that also rang true to that same idea that this was really not about just men going away to war, but an entire community facing that. So I wondered if either of you could talk a little bit about maybe Alex, the effects on people at home when these service members were going away, and on that idea of a more holistic community there.
I don't know for the Haudenosaunee folks specifically, but what it didn't make me think of was how the Haudenosaunee people didn't, of which Seneca is one of the Haudenosaunee tribes, didn't immediately join the war effort. They decided to join under their own declaration of war against the Axis. So they declared war against Hitler. They weren't going to just agree to go to war with the United States against Hitler. So there was an affirmation of sovereignty. So when I think about World War II and the Haudenosaunee people, that's kind of the story that I think about, and their assertion of sovereignty, even if they had this population that wanted to participate or to whatever level. But absolutely, I don't know a great deal of how they in particular participated in the war effort up in the Northeast.
And again, I think, in responding to something like Jasper Johns, which is part of that, male 20th century canon, the fact that Marie Watt is sort of taking that and turning it on its head with a medium that's so traditionally feminine and whatnot is something that really appeals to me with this work.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also the way that that Marie has brought into her work community and forming these organizing these sewing circles to create a lot of these works, particularly for that first exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian in New York. It was partly out of necessity to try to create, try to finish, complete these really labor intensive works in time for the exhibition. but it created such a great sense of community, you know, as people sat together and talked while they were stitching. And then she talked about how the individual stitches, people's different stitches within a work really represent kind of a fingerprint or a signature of the people who participated. And it's become an important part of her work ever since then. And so I think bringing that, that aspect of both, kind of a feminist approach and also an Indigenous approach to creating artwork, to her work.
I have a question about artwork relating to veterans specifically, and also given the establishment of the National Native American Veterans Memorial, did you see an uptick in collecting objects related to veterans specifically, or artwork, sort of a refocus on veteran artists?
Yeah, I would say some of both. And I guess I'll start by saying that, in creating the Veterans Memorial, we spent about a year and a half traveling across the country, holding consultations with tribal communities, veterans and community and family members to get a better sense of what they wanted to see in the memorial. And everywhere we went, we saw the ways that Native veterans were honored within their communities, whether through tribal veterans memorials or exhibitions within tribal museums, or maybe a wall of photographs of veterans in the community hall. And so that was really something that was really striking, just the way that the veterans are so respected and honored within tribal communities. So yeah, during the process of creating the memorial, and since then, we have started to focus on trying to collect some works that honor Native veterans. We've been approached by some artists with works that they wanted to share with the museum, and then we've also done some more focused looking for these kinds of works ourselves. And so we recently acquired a set of really beautiful prints by an artist named Yanni Whitehawk, titled "Takes Care of Them." These are 4 screen prints, and they're inspired by women's dentilium shell or dresses. And she really layered different textures to create the effect of wool, kind of similar to in Watt's blanket works, the way that the texture of the wool fabric is so important. But these prints are meant to evoke the ways that both women and veterans really take care of people within their communities, as the title says, takes care of them. They nurture, lead, protect, and create. And so these parallels, and Alex, you talked about this too, the way that service members and veterans within their communities and in this, warrior tradition in many communities, it wasn't just and isn't just about fighting. It's also about really serving and caring for your community and protecting your homeland, protecting your community and your way of life.
And if I recall, I think that was an express purpose of the memorial as well, to recognize the people at home who were supporting and continue to support their returning veteran, not just the veterans who served themselves.
Absolutely. And that's so as we were traveling and listening to what people wanted to see in the memorial, those are some of the things that we heard. They wanted, it was very important that the memorial be inclusive of all Native veterans, but also that it honor the service and sacrifice of the family members, the support given by the families of those who served. So so those were all very important.
I think that's one of the things that I really love about this piece, is that it is a personal story. And so there is that connection that I think, resonates more than some other works. And yet it's also very universal. She has not really focused it in on Edson, but donated it more to the entire community.
Yeah, and I think Marie talked about that too, wanting to that it's meant to honor her uncle, her great uncle, but also to honor veterans more broadly. And we see in the other piece that I showed, Forget Me Not, it's meant to honor veterans more broadly, but it also there's a focus on individual stories and individual portraits too. So really bringing those two kind of threads together. And, you know, I think that's interesting in the, I'm not recalling the name of the artist, but the work, the artist whose works you showed, Nora, that the cups, the ceramic cups that seem to be both individual and meant to be more universal as well.
Yeah, Aaron Toole's work
Yes.
is a veteran who gives those away to anyone who asks, and he's given away more than 10,000 cups to people, and it is meant to either honor their personal story. If you ask him for one, he will make one for you, but more generally just to bring the war home to people, because his father and grandfather had served and didn't really talk much about the experience, because it's sometimes very hard to talk about your war experiences. And so these kinds of domestic objects and art objects open up those conversations that sometimes otherwise we might not have. And that's, you know, part of the beauty of them.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think Forget Me Not too, it, you know, is meant to be a place where people can come together and share stories. And, you know, the fact that she collected in a small publication and on a website the stories of all of those who were represented. So it's a way of sharing what are often painful stories. Are there other works in the American Art Museum's collection that address veterans in service in a similar or different way?
Yeah, I think, you know, we've worked with folks like the Combat Paper Project, which is a favorite of mine, but I think military service has a lot to do with the history of craft in many ways. There were a lot of folks that came back and on the GI Bill went into craft and were part of that founding of the American studio craft movement in those ways. So I think it's a theme that comes back again and again. We also have a work that we are presently working on with artist Bisa Butler, who's creating a piece on the Harlem Hellfighters, which is going to be one of the largest works she's created to date, 9 figures. The Harlem Hellfighters, for those who don't know, were an infantry regiment in World War II who saw some of the most combat of any an African-American regiment. So they only just recently were honored with the Congressional Gold Medal by Joe Biden this last year. So another work that celebrates artists, veterans of color who sometimes don't get their due in their time.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. I really look forward to seeing that piece.
Yeah.
Alex, I wanted to ask you, are there, as you mentioned, the story of the Code Talkers is one of the best known stories of Native military service, particularly in World War II, but more broadly. Are there other stories that surprised you, or that just people might not know about, that you found about service during World War II?
You know, I think the like in the sort of the micro of World War II is expressive of the larger service in history, and for me, the lesson that the stories of these veterans taught me was one of sacrifice. And you know, and I know that this is a common you know, element of military service. But I think the social change, especially around World War II, is an extra aspect of that sacrifice. So, for example, I talked about it's really tens of thousands of people who were on the reservations on homelands and then moved out into cities to get wage work. Often they had already been in the boarding school system. So cities, towns may not have been terribly foreign to them, but it was an absolutely new way of life. Capitalism rather than sustainable agriculture or hunting, and it happened very, very quickly. So this changed how ceremonies were done at home. So if people were participating in wage work, they couldn't spend 4 days, for example, doing a ceremony for preparation for war, to prepare a warrior or something like that, just as a, you know, sort of a general example. So it did change their social structure in significant ways.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should turn over to audience questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Nora, Alexandra, and Rebecca, for an incredibly stimulating conversation so far. We have lots of questions coming in from our audience, many of which dovetail with topics you've been discussing. First, I have a question about Watt's work. The participant asks, how does Watt's work illustrate tensions between private memorialization and public memorialization using art? And of course, any of you are welcome to answer that, but perhaps Nora or Rebecca.
Go ahead.
You want? Oh, okay. And I guess I was just going to say, we kind of touched on that a little bit. The idea of both honoring an individual veteran, but also doing something that's meant to honor, the broader contributions of veterans. But I think again, there are interesting parallels too between the way that Watt created with the piece Forget Me Not, created the space for people to enter into and to gather and to share stories and remember. And, completely independently, then Harvey Pratt created a kind of a similar kind of space in some ways, again, a circular, inclusive, welcoming space for people to come into and remember those who have served. And I think, Nora, maybe you want to speak to some of that, the tensions in Toole's work, in Aaron Toole's work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a sweet spot there where you are telling a little bit of a private story, but you're only giving people so much of the story that it universalizes it. And I think that's the image that I had showed of the work of David Chatt, of his father's letters, that you can kind of glimpse words of that, and you feel a pull towards wanting to know more, but you don't get that, and you fill in those blank spots with your own story, and so that becomes part of your story. And that's where I think Watt's work also succeeds, in giving you just enough of a hint that this is a personal story and where this flag has been, and then allowing you to build on an army blanket that wasn't Edson's blanket, but a more universal symbol of that. You think about the kind of hardship of being out there, and that this was your one piece of comfort that was there, and that you inevitably had those intimate moments with. And so I think that's where it's really successful.
Yeah, and Nora, I think that also is something that Watt does so well with her work more broadly too, is using these blankets that have these tears and stains that capture the role they played in one person's life, but then really evoke stories and memories in the people that are seeing them too. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say again, she had related at one point a story to me that a graphic designer saw the image and called her up and said, "Can I just eliminate this because I'm doing this catalog?" And she's like, "No, that's part of the piece. Don't get rid of it. It's an essential part of the piece. You have this, compulsion to edit, but those are really the important parts to it."
Mm-hmm. And I love that she uses only wants to use these used blankets, because that's that the things that make them imperfect are the things that tell just like people's wrinkles, they tell the story of your life.
Wanted to circle back, Rebecca, to your discussion of Marie's practice working with others in creating some of her artworks. One of our audience members asks, for artists like Marie Watt that create in a communal setting, how have artists had to alter their practice during the past 2 years amidst a global pandemic?
And I would love to hear Nora speak to this too. I know just of some examples. For example, a recent project that Marie Watt and another artist, Chanupa Hanska-Luger, did together. It had initially been intended to be a collaborative project, bringing people together in person to contribute to the work. And they had to find different ways of doing it, but they came up with some incredible work together, having people contribute, do things on their own and then send them in to be a part of this work. But yes, it has certainly been such a challenge for for all of us in so many different ways, and for socially engaged artists, I think it's, posed both some challenges and some opportunities for that piece. For example, people who might not have been able to come in person to a gathering were able to contribute from a distance.
Yeah, I think I'm not thinking of a specific example right now, but a lot of artists who have also just, taken the time to reflect on their practice and do much smaller work and try things that are a little bit more intimate scale and contributing to the effort. I know a lot of fiber artists who turned to making masks during the pandemic and whatnot. So it was still a kind of a communal effort to create something, but each in their own individual environments in their own way.
Thanks. Alexandru, we have a couple of audience members who are interested in learning more about how the code talkers emerged and the extent to which the tribal languages were used as codes during the war.
Sure. It's a very long story, and there's some really excellent books that I would recommend, including ours. But, it started in World War I, where 3 languages were sort of the first, I think Eastern Cherokee, Choctaw, and one other. I'm digging in my memory banks. But the Choctaw started to be the most organized at the very end of World War I. When people started realizing, wait a minute, this is a conversation that started sort of just as a casual happenstance conversation between 2 Choctaw people that became a successful way of communicating across enemy lines. And so that the Germans wouldn't intercept their communications and understand what they were talking about. And that really did benefit in the last weeks of World War I. There was an attempt to formalize that and create a code within the language that would be even more difficult to break. But just as that program started, World War I ended. But it was not forgotten. So when World War II came around, the Marine Corps and the Army started to recruit tribes and tribal language speakers for a formal language program. So the Marine Corps was the one that developed the Navajo code talking program, which was the largest program, ultimately 420 Navajo language speakers. But there were, again, several languages that were brought in as formal codes within a codes, Meskwaki, Hopi, just with 8 speakers, sort of a little bit farther into the war. But this actually started the process of developing these codes started prior to the U.S. joining the war. So yeah, it was really well developed out. It was very successful. But then at some point, our military started becoming doubtful and suspicious because, well, the enemy can't understand them and neither can we. So what are they really saying? And so it could have been expanded even more, but there was still that suspicion. And I think that's been a suspicion that of Native American people throughout history. Why are they supporting our country's military, because we've been pretty terrible to them? So, but there's a fierce patriotism and commitment by Native people in general throughout history to support the U.S. military.
And Alex, a couple of points based on what you were saying. One is that I think a lot of people aren't aware that many of these men who were asked to use their languages to transmit messages had been, as children, punished for speaking those languages in boarding schools, and so then they were asked to use their languages to contribute in a way that they were uniquely able to do, and they stepped up and did so. And I lost my other train of thought.
No, absolutely. I mean, and come back to it, because I think that's one of the most important points, the important ironies of code talking and the success of the code talking program is that a lot of these kids were brought up in federal and religious boarding schools that would literally beat them for speaking their language. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the languages endured to the extent that they could actually serve their country using these languages is a massive irony. And something worth discussion and remembering, you know, that despite, I don't know, to me, it's a resilience that you see throughout history in as dark as talking about warfare and researching the history of warfare can be. The amount of resilience that emerges, especially from Native tribes defending their own sovereignty, homelands, and this aspect of you know, carrying through traditions throughout wars and even having to adapt them, but that they survive and end up contributing to success.
Mhm. I did remember my other thought, which was just that, you know, you touched on the irony that so many Native people choose to serve, and the broader public wondering why would that be the case? Why would they want to serve? And, you know, as we did these consultations across the country, we would often ask, well, why did you choose to serve? And as you alluded to, you know, we heard a lot of different reasons. We heard I was drafted, or I needed a job, or it was a chance to see the world. But the thing that we kept hearing again and again in these consultations was a sense of responsibility to protect one's homeland and family and community and way of life and language. And so, you know, really this inherited sense of responsibility to protect.
An obligation in a way that defines the role of a warrior. If you know, we can't really use the words that any given tribe would, but when I talk to language speakers, they would say, oh yeah, you know, this resonates with me because the word we use is this, and it means something slightly different than you know, what American English defines as somebody who goes to war, a soldier or a warrior.
Mhm.
It involves obligation, and that obligation to your family, to the people who are at home, and to the land, to the water. And, you know, as I mentioned, that meant that these veterans returned from World War II and started organizing towards social and political causes, and still did. Again, we saw that in huge numbers also after Vietnam and the civil rights era. And I know that was similar for African American soldiers. And so you had this movement, pan-Indian, so beyond tribal boundaries, to have obligation towards land, water, way of life.
Thanks so much for sharing more about the motivations behind service and the nuances of the strength and resilience behind it. As we near the end of our program, I thought I would bring it back to a question about the artwork that started it all, Marie Watts' Edson's flag. One of our audience members asked about how the work was made. The person asks, are the other textiles overlaying a flag such that they can be removed, leaving the American flag intact, or is the American flag cut up and sewn into the other fabrics?
No, the American flag has not been touched in this. It certainly could be undone, and the other fabrics that were involved in the creation, the various pinks, all came at the beginning of the project when Marie was searching around for materials. She would go to Goodwill to pick up these blankets, and she would challenge herself to always spend under $5 for any blanket. So pink was a popular color, and that just seemed to play well into the composition in those ways. And then the army blanket, of course, which as I think I mentioned earlier, she really thought long and hard about whether that was something that she wanted to include. And she got feedback very early on that from veterans that they would love to see that history, their own history, reflected in some of her work. And so after hearing that, she really felt like she had the permission, if you will, to be able to incorporate that into the work so that she could talk about their stories and more universal stories. And I think her work really has developed out from there as well to incorporate blankets from all over the world now. So it's slowly gotten larger and larger to talk about more universal humanity and our relationships with these objects that go basically from cradle to grave.
Thanks, Nora. Oh, Rebecca, were you going to share something?
I was just going to mention that that I remember Marie also talking about her hesitation to use army blankets, and just because of the weight that comes with, the weight of the stories and the memories that they carry, and that around the time that she started to feel like it was okay for her to use them, she also thought more about her role as a custodian of these blankets and the stories that they carry and the responsibility that comes with that, and actually did some works called Custodian as she was thinking this through.
Before we close, I want to invite the three of you to share any final remarks or fleeting thoughts that you want to leave with our audience.
I would just like to thank you for inviting Alexandra and I to be part of this conversation with Nora. It's such a wonderful opportunity. I love that piece of Marie Watts at Sam's Collection and was so excited the first time I saw it hanging at the Renwick. And so I had seen it in this first exhibition at NMEI in New York. And so it was wonderful to see it there, to know it's part of the Smithsonian now, and to have a chance to talk about it with you.
Rebecca and Alex, I feel the same way. I was really excited for this conversation to also hear more about the piece in your collection that has such an obvious resonance, and it's just been a really rich conversation, so thank you.
I'm really honored to be part of your talk, and thank you for letting me give some historical context to this artwork. And it was one of the things that when we were developing our Why We Serve book, I was really interested in gaining some other aspect of how to heal from war, how to understand military service. And Rebecca actually wrote the chapter in our book about artists veterans, and I think that's it really augments the story of military experience. Just this discussion of art and how art's used for in many different ways, in many different expressions surrounding this military service.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, Nora, Alexandra, and Rebecca. One of my favorite parts of working at the Smithsonian is the chance to make these really rich interdisciplinary connections like we have today. Thank you also to the behind the scenes folks for all of their work to help the program run smoothly. Once again, please fill out the survey in your browser and let us know what you enjoyed about today's program. Finally, we invite you to join us on November 17th for our Clarice Smith lecture with scholar Richard Powell. More information can be found on our website or via the link in the chat. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.